Putting things in places they don't belong just to see what happens is really interesting. That's why we took a cyclist to different planets to explore how biking might work there. Surprisingly, it kind of works on some planets, but there are even places worse than taking your bike to the sun. Let's begin with the best biking experience. Riding a bicycle on Mars is our top choice. It would be mostly interesting, but it's not completely without obstacles. The first thing you would notice is that pedaling would be a lot easier. This is because Mars has about 38% of Earth's gravity, which means you would weigh significantly less. This would help you cycle for much longer before getting tired. However, maintaining balance could be trickier, as the reduced gravity may make it easier to lose traction and slip, especially on the uneven terrain. Besides the difficulty of cycling on sand and the occasional sandstorm, the worst part of cycling on Mars would be the temperature. With an average temperature of around -80 degrees Fahrenheit or -60 degrees Celsius, you'd have a hard time holding onto the handlebars if you forgot your gloves. If you're thinking, that doesn't sound too bad, cycling at our next destination is much more difficult. Pluto. Yes, it's not a planet, but you might as well swing by Pluto, as it offers a quite unique experience. On Pluto, the gravity is even weaker, only 6.7% of Earth's gravity to be precise. So, if you weigh 150 pounds or 68 kilograms on Earth, you'd weigh only 10 pounds or 4.5 kilograms on Pluto. This would drastically change how cycling works. With each pedal stroke, you'd be pushed off the ground and float a little before coming back down. Balancing and staying upright would be very challenging, so you should consider investing in some training wheels. Once you start moving, it would be difficult to stop or turn, as you wouldn't have any traction on the surface due to your light weight. The fact that the surface is mostly made of ice wouldn't help either. If you thought Mars was cold, you're in for a bad time, as the average temperature on Pluto is -375 degrees Fahrenheit or -225 degrees Celsius. This would most certainly freeze your bike chains, making it difficult to get anywhere. And if you think that's bad, Ceres, another dwarf planet, has even worse news. Ceres is the largest object in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and cycling on it would be fascinating, to say the least. With only 3% of Earth's gravity, you would be so light that it would be hard to stay grounded. In such conditions, you'd be able to jump over 10 meters into the air, regardless of your athletic ability. So each pedal stroke would lift you up significantly. Balancing a bicycle would be impossible, so you'd have to switch to a tricycle or a four-wheeler instead. And then you'd basically be bunny hopping around. Oh, and I forgot, it would be cold as well. Mercury could have been an ideal destination for a bicycling adventure, if it weren't just for one thing. With 38% of Earth's gravity, you'd weigh about the same as on Mars. Pedaling would be easier and balancing tricky, but manageable. Mercury has almost no atmosphere, so you would experience little to no air resistance or wind slowing you down. The surface is covered in dust, rocks, and craters, making the terrain very rough. But hey, people cycle on mountains, so it's probably fine. The only problem with Mercury, and it's a big one, is the temperature, which can reach up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit or 427 degrees Celsius during the day and drop to -330 degrees Fahrenheit or -201 degrees Celsius at night. Getting the timing of your trip right would be crucial for your survival. Can it get any worse than this? How about 100 times worse? Let's visit Uranus. The planet. Uranus is an ice giant, but while it's called an ice giant, this doesn't mean it has a solid icy surface. Uranus has a thick gaseous atmosphere and an interior composed of dense fluids and ice. There is no solid ground to ride a bike on. If you try to descend onto the planet with your bike, you'd just sink deeper into its atmosphere, falling through layers of gas with increasing pressure. You'd freeze solid before the pressure eventually squished you. Even if you found a solution to the freezing or squishing problem and eventually reached a solid surface, which we don't know for sure even exists, you'd experience winds with speeds reaching up to 560 miles per hour or 900 kilometers per hour, which would make it very difficult to hold on to your bike. And now, before we go to the most catastrophic place to ride a bike in our universe, we have 3 planets where a pattern emerges. On Jupiter, you're crushed. On Neptune, crushed. On Venus, you guessed it, crushed. But it's also very hot. And now you might think, what can possibly be worse than being crushed? Saturn could make it worse. Saturn is a giant mostly made of gas, just like Uranus. The planet, you would experience much of the same, just worse, in every single way. There is no solid surface, so you would fall through the atmosphere, which, you guessed it, would eventually crush you. Before being crushed, you would have frozen solid in the outer layer of the atmosphere, which would make it very hard to pedal your bike. As you fall further, the temperature would rise drastically. Temperatures could reach up to 21,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 11,700 degrees Celsius, which is hotter than the surface of the sun. So even if you somehow survived the crushing pressure, you would be incinerated by the extreme heat that follows. By then, there wouldn't even be a bike left to pedal. The disintegrated remains of you and your bike would then be scattered across Saturn by winds that can reach speeds of up to 1,100 miles or 1,770 kilometers per hour. If you had an idea about cycling on Saturn's iconic rings instead, that's not gonna work. Saturn's rings are not solid, but made up of ice, rock, and dust, orbiting Saturn at high speeds. So it's much more likely to give you a serious beating than to provide a pleasant biking experience. Do you know what spaghetti has to do with black holes? Find out in this video, where we explore what happens if you fly a drone into a black hole.